Hello there and welcome to Mad Doc Minis. In this video I'm going to be making a custom Orc Kommando Kopter to transport my glorious classic Bloodaxe Kommandos to and from the battlefield. Found this old helicopter toy, kind of a Sea King look to it, bit of a Sea King knockoff, comic proportions, right kind of scale, so decided to go with that. I'm going to take you on a rough guide of what I did to orcify this helicopter up a little bit. The first thing I did was to raid this kit that I had. I'd already built the jet out of this kit, the Dakar jet, but there are plenty of leftover bits and pieces and parts from the variants that I didn't build. So I'm going to go through and just chop some of those off and see what ones work and what ones don't on the helicopter with a little bit of dry fitting. Just, you know, going round and fitting them here and there and having a little look at what works. I don't want too much of a ramshackle look to this thing. The Bloodaxes are a little bit more organised about warfare. They're sneaky, they use tactics, they've got commandos. I wanted a slightly more realistic look to this thing, so it's not going to be a really ramshackle job at the end. You'll see what I mean. Yeah, just want it to be themed a little bit more closely to the Bloodaxes. So what I do next, actually, after a bit of dry fitting, is to create a doorway in the side of this helicopter. Get the Dremel out, as that's the easiest way to do it. And I want to do it now because it's quite a messy kind of job. And I want this to really connect this helicopter to the idea that it is actually a troop transport rather than just a gunship. So I may put a big shooter in the doorway later on, or stick an Orc boy in there or something, just to kind of solidify that battlefield role of this vehicle. Next, we're going to go around and super glue some bits and pieces on that we got from the Dakar jet kit. A little bit of super glue here, a little bit of hot glue there, normally does the trick on these things. I actually discovered that a couple of the major parts that I really want to use didn't fit very well where I wanted to use them. I could have just glued them on and had a real slap together look. I mean, you can use that excuse with Orcs if you want, but I just wanted them to look a little bit more part of the structure. So I got the Dremel back out and made away, basically. So cut a couple of good holes in the side of the helicopter. And that enabled me to kind of achieve an inset look with the armoured plates. A little bit of tidying up with the clippers as well. I'm not too worried about rough cuts and things like that. But it just didn't look right with them slapped onto the surface. And making that little adjustment just made me happier about it, basically. And I wanted a fair bit of symmetry to this as well, so of course I had to repeat this on both sides. Came out fairly well. These little wings are also from the Dakar jet kit, and they're about the right size and shape, and they just make it look a little bit better in my view. A little bit of hot glue does the trick to attach those, and just gives me some options later on in case I want to attach any rockets or weapons. Yeah, I think they definitely give it something, make it look a bit more swooshable. One of my many discarded Terminator boxes here from all those Primaris Terminator conversions. I have got a bit of a problem, guys, and I will get some help for it at some stage, I promise. Until then, I'm just going to use this box for a bit of cardstock to add some improvised armoured plates here and there. Not much thought process going behind this, but I don't want a really junkyard look to this thing, but it does need to be connected a bit more firmly to the Orc race, and we need to break up some of those smoother lines on the toy helicopter. So cardstock is a really cheap and easy way to do that. Just added a few panels here and there. So a rotor blade next. We are going for EPVC here, which is a great crafting material. You can see my discarded prototype in the top of the screen there, which is made from a kind of plastic toy kit, but it didn't work very well, too big and bulky. So I decided to make my own, and I went for a 4-bladed rotor. And the little popper you can see in the middle of the orange rotor blade, I used that in the centre of the new one, broke it off and hot glued it onto my custom rotor blade. And it just adds an interesting point in the centre and adds a little bit of rigidity and attaches all the rotor blades together nicely with a bit of hot glue. I actually used a smaller version of this, and this is just a piece of clothing popper that I had lying around. But I use a slightly smaller one underneath as well, just to strengthen the build a little bit more, and that's got a little nub that sticks out that's going to go into a hole in the top of the helicopter. But I soon work out that the hole isn't actually quite big enough to receive it, so I have to widen that out a little bit with a larger kind of drill bit, and then that's going to add a nice attachment point later on when I'm ready to glue the rotor blade on. I'm not going to do that yet for painting purposes, of course, but that gives you an idea of what it's going to end up looking like. So next we need to make this thing a little bit more shooty. So I get these, again, from the Dakajet kit, these shooters, and kind of angle those, pay a little bit of attention to where they're pointing and to symmetry and all the rest of it. You can see I've added a couple more armoured plates with cardstock as well to the front of the helicopter. Yeah, it just makes it look a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more orky. It has to be armed in some way, doesn't it? It is Warhammer 40,000 after all. And this vent goes perfectly on the front, a little bit of trimming inside, and it just sits there so nicely. Really, really happy with how that particular piece turned out, and it just helps to connect it to the rest of the Orc range, I think. So some bits just end up working so well, and this is one of them. Really, really happy. Next up, we're going back to the rotor blade, and I want to make that look a little bit more orky. So I go ahead and chop some triangles of the EPVC stuff that I made the rotor blade out of, and we're going to stick those onto the end. I'm not going for a real serrated look like as with the Def Kopters kit. I don't want to go overboard with it, but I just want to hint at that. And I think these little spikes on the end just bring it back to the kind of Orc race a little bit more. So after that, we're going to trim off these tail fins, because I don't really like the way they look. The way the helicopter's going, they just don't fit in with it anymore. So just hack those off and make my own with a bit of EPVC again, and just hot glue those in on the side, and it just goes a lot better with the rest of the build. After adding a few more bits and pieces, we're ready to prime, and bam, job done. Look at that. It's a wonderful step, a favourite of many hobbyists, including myself, because all your hard work comes together in literally a few short seconds. This is just pound shop grey primer, guys, nothing special. Chose primer because it's a lot of smooth plastic on this thing, and just a basic undercoat may have kind of come off a bit too easily. We're going to need to reprime a little bit later on, because I've got a few more bits and pieces to add yet. Landing gear is of the first of those. We found these old Warhammer 40,000 wheels. I think they're actually from an Orc kit as well, which is suitable. They are a bit rugged and big for a helicopter, strictly speaking, but it's an Orc vehicle. I'm fine with that. Just need to take these horrible screws out of the toy to make way to stick those wheels in on these natural indentations on the bottom of the helicopter. I think this must have been where the original wheels, whatever this thing had, went before. It's just a nice spot for them to go now, actually. I do stick a drawing pin into the centre of these wheels, just a design choice really, and then we get ready to hot glue those in on the side. Hot glue does the trick beautifully here, and as ever we're looking for a fairly symmetrical layout here, so a little bit of checking from underneath in different angles just to make sure that it sits nice and evenly when you put it down on the ground. Gives it some needed clearance off the ground as well. I just add a little bit of EPVC into this little awkward gap in the front of the vent here that was bugging me. Sorts the problem out very simply. A little bit of hot glue, it does the trick. We go back to landing gear again, and I have this old Lego wheel. Anyone from my generation will recognise that instantly, and probably have one or two floating around in the attic somewhere. Just make a little slot in the back of the fuselage there, pump a load of hot glue in goes the wheel. Very easily done. We do make a little housing for that wheel later as well with some EPVC, just because it didn't look right on its own, just sitting there. So a couple of strips of that. We hot glue those onto the bottom, and it just looks a bit more plausible then. Going back again to the rotor blade now, and we're going to use a little bit of cardstock just to beef out the rotor blade a little bit and add a little bit more detail to it, because it was looking a bit barren in comparison to the rest of the model. Cardstock, again, such a simple thing, but really, really adds something to a model with that little bit of layering. After that's primed, as you'll see in a second, it just transforms the textured surface of the rotor blade. It just makes it so much more interesting. And yeah, really, really happy with how that turned out. Next up is a little bit of undercoat with this hideous spray. It was so old, it hardly came out. I think all the kind of propellant had gone, but it just about did the trick. We then do a little bit of a tiger camouflage pattern with some black contrast paint, black Templar. You shouldn't really use contrast paints on large models like this at all, but because I'm a rebel, I did it anyway. We do kind of sort that out a little bit in a minute, as you'll see. The black works okay, but then I come in with a shade paint, Reichlem Flesh Shade actually, and this is a step that wasn't required in the end. It just didn't do enough to the desert color of the spray. I wanted to darken it down quite a lot, and it just didn't end up darkening it enough for my taste. So what we did, after I realized that it was too light look, just didn't do it really. I come in with the original color that I used on the Commandos themselves, which is Snakebite Leather, another contrast paint, and that darkened it off a lot more. However, we did start to see a bit of a problem with the idea of using contrast paints over a larger model like this, because you get this streaking effect that doesn't happen, of course, when you're painting infantry because they're so much smaller. Now, it is an Orc vehicle, so I'm not massively bothered about this, but I do find a way to sort it out, actually, which is interesting. I actually used some contrast medium while it was still wet, while it was still drying, and just kind of slap that all over the model, onto the black and the tan areas, and it lightened it up a little bit, which you've got to be aware of. It will do that, but it also got rid of a lot of the streaking. So there you go. I mean, if you do really want to use contrast paints on a bigger model, this might be a valid technique in trying to make them look a little bit better. And I still kept a lot of the staining as well from the paint, so really happy with that. I actually spill my contrast paint in a minute, which is really the contrast medium. I actually spill it, and it's really depressing. I really hate Games Workshop paint pots. They're just awful. Here we go, ready on screen, and a bit of swearing. Damn it. Okay, so we go round and pick out some of the details. A little bit of bolt gun metal here. Oh, I'm not allowed to call it that anymore, am I? It's, what is it? Lead belcher? Is that the right name for it? Can't ever remember. But anyway, picking out all the details that I want to be metal, just going round there. And I give it a little bit of a dry brush all over with bolt gun, sorry, lead belcher again. And that just gives it a bit of a chewed up, rough look, because I'd wanted to look like it's actually been in combat and used. A little bit of black contrast paint on the tyres, just to darken those off. I really like contrast paint for wheels and tyres and things. It does the job nicely for me. We're going to pick out some red details as well, like the skull here, the Orc skull on the side. And I'm going to pick out a few armoured panels as well, just to break up the camouflage scheme a little bit. I still want it to be nice and dark and camouflaged. I'm not going to do anything too gaudy on this, but it just breaks things up nicely. Same thing with the rotor blade here, just picking out various panels. Just brings it back to the Orcs just a little bit more, because I know it's a tidier build, this. The window just gets some Abaddon black on there. Nothing fancy there. I didn't want to go for a bright colour. And yeah, just black is the simplest way to go. Two thin coats and all that. Then a dark wash, Nuln Oil, all over actually. Focused on the metal bits first, but all over the model. Had this spare Commando, this classic Commando, so I decided to actually hot glue him into the opening that I made at the beginning. Hot glue does the trick nicely because it sinks into the bit of granny grating I put in the doorway there, and holds them in nicely and just adds a little bit of detail to the interior. So that's a nice addition, I think. And I just need to tidy up that armoured plate that I added on the wing at a later stage to cover up a thumbprint where I'd put my thumb in some wet paint. So I just use a bit of black again just to kind of paint over that, as you'll see in the next sequence. And I don't actually bother doing anything else with that. I just leave it black, you know, which is fine. Again, just adds to the Yorkie theme a little bit more. The rotor blade gets glued on now with a little bit of hot glue and goes into that hole in the top, and stick it at an angle that looks pleasing to me. And we're nearly done. There's just a couple of little bits to do, but it's really starting to come together now. I actually need to go underneath and sort out the landing gear, because the front landing gear just looks like it's floating there. It doesn't look like it would actually work, which kind of bugs me. So I just hot glue in a little bit of EPVC again to act as, I don't know, like an axle housing or something on the front. Paint that black. It's not going to get seen very much, so I'm not too bothered about the underside of this thing. And yeah, we are ready to go to some visuals. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. I'm on to about 350 subscribers at the time of making this video, which is wonderful. Thank you for all the support and the kind comments. Do keep them coming. I love reading all your comments. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It all helps the channel to grow. I really do appreciate it. And I'm trying to get a little bit better at presenting my models. So it's still a bit amateurish, I'm afraid. I'm just a guy with a phone, but I hope you enjoy the final sequences in a minute. They're a little bit better than the ones ones I've done before, but not much. So take care, guys, and I really hope you enjoyed the build, and I really enjoyed making it. So join me again for another video, and in the meantime, take care. Bye-bye.